Welcome, demigods. You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And we've been very ill. Well, sick. We've been sick for a while. So today, we are catching up on episodes 3 through 5 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians on Disney+. So that's 3 episodes, 3 times the fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They were fun.
They were. So, yeah, Olga got pretty sick, lost her voice, so obviously we couldn't record. Then as she was starting to feel better, I got pretty sick, lost my voice, so we couldn't record. So it just didn't work out timing-wise because Disney had to put this out during flu season. You know?
Well, who knows what we had that mystery bug that got like so much of the population after the holidays. So stay safe out there, folks. It's not over yet.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Clara had and still has some eye problems going on, so she hasn't been able to watch screens.
Yeah.
Which obviously sucks. I think she's doing better. Hopefully we'll have her maybe for the finale or something.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what, we'll do like a season review.
Mm-hmm.
So hoping to have her back. We had been doing this whole plan of 2 podcasts a week where we were going to do like quick reactions and then a longer one.
And then we went to no podcasts a week.
So what we're going to do, what we decided we're aiming to do is put out 1 podcast a week on Fridays. We will see how this goes, just with all the craziness and everything. That's the plan. So for episodes 6, 7, and 8, we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to have read the book for that too. And so what are you thinking about the show 5 episodes in?
I'm really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's getting stronger and stronger with every episode. And I think the interpersonal dynamics and the character development really work. They're fleshing out the world. I think that they are still struggling to actually educate about the mythology that this is based on. It feels very Disney in that way to me, of how a lot of Disney properties that are based on folklore and folktales or, fairy tales take the original text and then really twist it and go make their own thing out of it. And it's not quite to that degree overall, but it just feels like it's not as educational for the layman viewer or the child viewer as I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the best things about the series of books is that it is a fun educational way for kids to get to know the Greek mythology. And that's the kind of thing where if you then have your unit in 6th grade or whatever about that stuff, you're going to have a leg up. And you're not going to know everything, but everything's going to sound familiar at least, right? I think that they definitely have been very vague at moments in ways that I think are Disneyfied. I think that they rush through things sometimes so quickly that I'm like, did anybody who didn't already know this actually take that in? I don't know. Yeah, it's unfortunate because honestly, I didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like Rick already did so much to kidify all this stuff and sand off the edges of things that I'm pretty surprised. I mean, I understand you can only do so much exposition stuff, but it is still a little surprising to me. That being said, I agree with you. I really particularly enjoyed episodes 4 and 5, which we'll get into more. Episode 3 was a little worrying for me. I was really not a fan of how intensely they adapted that episode.
Reinterpreted.
Yeah. I mean, that is the biggest departure, I think, so far as actual plot and things go.
Yeah.
And, they changed some stuff in episode 5 too, but I thought it worked better. It's hard as a longtime fan not to see changes and be like, oh, they think badly about this part of the book and get a little defensive about it. I'll admit. And even I'm like, come on, Rick, what do you think wasn't good enough anymore?
Yeah.
But it's a different medium. We'll have a lot of specifics to talk about.
I mean, we will have specifics.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem that I had in some places. It wasn't just the fact that it changed it. It's that it felt like a change that wasn't better or wasn't conveying a story effectively.
Or wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's where it would get me. So maybe let's talk.
Well, actually, a couple more things
Okay.
that I just thought of. One is I was getting, and still am a little bit worried about budget things. There's definitely around episode 3 and a little bit of 4. There's a little bit of like, okay, they had to pick and choose where the budget was going.
Yeah.
And I feel that they're in the volume and I feel that they're in some cramped spaces from time to time. It's not constant. But it is something to be aware of. I mean, especially we're going to talk about episode 3 and it's like there's a whole fight on a moving bus and it's like, no. I understand it, but these are the kinds of things why I personally really would have preferred an animated series where none of that was a problem.
But those things are also expensive.
Because even when, I think that the Chimera looks great for a CGI TV show.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it still looks like a CGI character.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was animated, that would be a whole other can of worms. But,
I think we've been established as people who were worried about it not being animated or who in our book review days being like, oh, if they ever adapt it, we want it to be animated. Like we like animated shows. Not a lot of people do. I see why they wanted this to be live action. I think that's a lot more appealing and has more mass appeal to an audience, even though it has like physical reality limitations.
2 positive things.
Mm-hmm.
One, I have been impressed with like the stunt choreography, and I don't like. I was a little worried thinking about live action going into this, being like, is it going to look like wonky having a 12-year-old, like an actual 12-year-old boy swinging a sword around? I haven't felt that way at all watching him use the sword. I think they've been great. And another positive thing is I was a little bit worried about Annabeth and a little bit of her acting and a little bit of her interaction in around episodes 2 and 3. Really enjoyed her in 4 and 5.
Yes.
So that's been a big positive for me.
Yeah, I really think that as a trio in episodes in 4 and 5, everyone hits their stride with like having a perspective and demonstrating it. Those are the episodes that I felt the most immersed in, saying these are people who are the character. Like I was watching the episodes and being like, I'm watching Annabeth and Percy and Grover, as opposed to being like, this is their interpretation. Yeah. Again, when we listen to the book, I go, this is the familiar Percy and Annabeth and Grover. But nonetheless, I found myself being like, oh, look at them being the characters. They're so cute. Yeah. They're so sweet and smart and spunky. And
lots of good humor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, the humor is really working for me in the show. Yeah.
All right. Episode 3?
Yeah, let's get into it. So we're not going to go into too much detail about book comparisons just because we are getting 3 episodes into this one podcast, but we will bring some up.
Yeah, we have some like key points we want to talk about.
Yeah. All right. So episode 3, we visit the Garden Gnome Emporium. I did not see any garden gnomes.
Well, no, there were. No, I guess there depends on how you define gnomes.
Gnomes. All right, so let's start off with the Gabe Oracle.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I was very taken aback by this until then we read the book, and I was like, oh, they did this in the book. I totally forgot because we've gotten so used to the Oracle just talking.
Yeah, that's something Rick left behind was images of other people saying the prophecy. Yeah. It's like not just the Oracle says the prophecy.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't complain about it as far as like it is book accurate.
It was really jarring though on first watch. We're like, what is happening?
I was not a big fan. It just felt it's because there was literally no explanation. It wasn't like, oh, it comes in the form of your greatest fear, or like, and also the fact that it was like still Gabe's voice and not like I think the way that they do it in the book is it's like the Oracle's deadpan voice coming out of his mouth, and it comes out of multiple people at the poker table. I don't know. It just seemed really out of place to me, but whatever.
This is something that they didn't super adapt from the book. All right. The prophecy itself, that also got a little bit of a reinterpretation, especially in episode 3.
Well, the way it was sort of parsed out.
Yes. So word for word, it was there. However, Show Percy is really focused on the lines about a friend will betray you. That's the theme of episode 3. Whereas in the book, Percy's really focusing in on how he's destined to fail.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really good change.
Yeah.
I think this makes a lot of sense for the arc that they are sending him on, especially with him and Annabeth being more at odds with each other and giving them a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. It also gives more direct reasoning for why he picks the two people he picks. Whereas in the book, it's kind of like, well, Grover wants his searcher's license and Annabeth's here and she wants to, so why not? But and I think it's important to also note that I feel like in episodes 4 and 5 is when he starts talking more about the failure side of things. And so it kind of progresses. And I think that's smart. It's interesting because in the book, they don't really highlight the someone will betray you, but they do much more highlight someone's in the camp who's in the inside job, the hound coming.
Yeah, there was a hellhound that got summoned, so everyone knows that something suspicious is going on.
Chiron talks about it more. So they're talking about the betrayal, but he isn't thinking about it in that way.
Personally.
Yeah, and I think also I feel like in the book, the reason they don't make a big fuss about it is because they want you to almost forget about it and then be surprised at the end. But it makes sense that Percy would definitely like take it in. And I think it's a good way of setting up this episode. We talk about how each episode sort of has its own internal goal, which you need more in a show than you do in a book. And I think, the coming together of the three makes sense. It is interesting to me because when we knew that he was sort of focused on the betrayal thing and then he picked Grover, I was like, oh, Grover already kind of betrayed him, even though we know that it...
Why? Back at Yancey Academy.
But like that feeling of betrayal from Grover felt like it was still in Percy's head. But then we find out that it was completely the opposite. And he was like,
no, you're not going to betray me.
So that was a little surprising.
Yeah. I was like, ooh, this is a deep cut. And I was like, no, you imagine that this would be a problem. This is where I actually, again, going back to the exposition and mythology, wished that they'd brought up how children of, or basically how Athena and Poseidon don't get along, how they're enemies, and that therefore their children shouldn't, enemies might be too strong. They are rivals, and therefore their children are going to be rivals. That would have, again, brought in a little bit more of that mythology of like, not only are we not going to be friends because we don't jive, it has precedence. But instead, they're taking it of how, again, focusing on Percy's resentment of his father. So maybe by bringing that up, he'd be like, well, I'm going to prove my dad wrong. I'm going to prove all the gods wrong. We need to be friends because who cares what our parents think?
As much as I didn't enjoy some of the interactions in this episode when I watched them, I do think it helped with a sort of arc, especially for Annabeth, where, by episode 5, she sees who he is and where he's coming from and what she can learn from him in a way that she didn't quite at the beginning. It was jarring for me for her to be so unlikable when in the book, they squabble, but I would never say that there's no point to me where they're not friends adjacent.
Well, and that's very different where Percy says in the show, we could never be friends. I don't see us ever being friends. So that's
when we were reading the book, we marked down that's like they play hacky sack, the three of them, while waiting for the bus. She compliments him multiple times. He compliments her. They still squabble, but it's never like
it's not on the level of what the show demonstrates, where she's just like, she's in charge, he's fighting for it, she's insulting him about how he needs to get it together, and he takes that personally. And it makes sense, for the characters that they are being, for the arc they're giving them, it's in line with its own universe.
Yeah.
It's just like a different take.
Yeah.
So speaking of Annabeth and the scene with Mrs. Dodds on the bus.
Yeah, that another big addition here.
Yes.
So yeah, she goes invisible and she talks to Mrs. Dodds before Dodds attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting scene. We sort of off mic went back and forth about this because it feels a little odd to me because Dodds is like, I want to take Percy and bring him to Hades, and it's like, and Percy wants to go to Hades. So it's like it's a weird, like, we realized on rewatch it's like, oh, Dodds doesn't know that they're going to Hades anyway.
So they don't know that their quest is to the underworld.
Yeah.
So she's like, my orders are to take Percy to the underworld.
Yeah.
And Annabeth's like, I'm not going to,
allow that to happen.
Right.
Which is like, okay, we can like reason out the like, that's not necessarily the best way. She's going to take just Percy and not the other two.
You can't trust the other Furies to let the others tag along.
You can't really do anything stealthily if they're, bringing him. That said, it was just a sort of a weird thing of like, yeah, we want to bring him there. No, you can't possibly bring him to the place that we're going to anyway.
Yeah. I on rewatch had less of an issue with this, but still, it was a very weird conversation because there's also this added layer of Dodds talking about how, or Alecto, that's who she really is, Alecto the Fury, of saying how Annabeth is the most formidable, possibly the most formidable demigod of this age. And
this is like the third time we've heard something like that.
It was that, but it was also really confusing for us because the last time that Alecto saw Annabeth was when she was with Thalia. That's what we got used to calling her Thalia.
She's gonna be Thalia for me.
Yeah, I'll try to go in line with the show. But Thalia and Luke, and Annabeth was 7 years old. So she's really little. And again, how much news is escaping camp to the underworld? Like, again, Hades doesn't have any kids there. So, like, how do they know? Annabeth has been asking for a quest. She's wanted to leave camp. They bring this up again in episode 5, how she's never even seen a movie because she's been so sheltered.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a weird line to be like, how did she get this reputation in the world?
It's also at the age of 12. It's also in stark contrast to the book, where a big part of the reason Annabeth wanted to go on a quest is she talks about how the real world is where you actually learn if you're any good or not. That, like, she's been sheltered and doing practice and all that stuff, and
she's been excelling. Yeah. Like, no doubt about that, but she's still a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah, and she would never say, like, I'm the greatest warrior or anything like that. Well, not that she's
No, she doesn't say it. Let's be fair. She doesn't say that. Other people say that about her. I don't think
she disagrees, though. My point being that, she's excited to go and be like, what am I actually made of? I want to find that out. Yeah. And so it does feel in pretty intense contrast there. There was a lot of changes here. There was a whole fight on the moving bus.
Percy's driving.
Percy's driving invisibly. He fights some of the Furies. Grover gets in the mix. So it's a whole other series of things that got much more simplified here. So that then also, Zeus hits the bus with lightning and all that stuff.
Instead, they just talk about how they couldn't fly because he's got a target on his back with Zeus.
Yeah. So then we get to the Gnome Emporium, and Dodds acts as this sort of force to keep them inside the house.
Yeah, because she's afraid of Medusa as well.
Yeah, but so I found that to be a really flimsy mechanic to keep them in with Medusa, because I'm like, at this point, why are they afraid of Dodds? Percy accidentally killed Dodds. Annabeth in one knife throw killed another Fury.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, it just felt a little like, I don't know. There's 3 of you guys. At this point,
you can take her.
Yeah.
Well, that aside, the Medusa their scenes are incredibly different from the book. This was so shocking to us of just like, oh my God, it's Medusa, and them being afraid of her. And it's like, whoa, what happens to this being an educational reveal of the myth of Medusa?
Which they do kind of do anyway, in a different way.
They do and they don't,
Yeah.
in that they give Medusa's side of events. And then they say, that's not what, or Annabeth says, like, that's not what happened, in a way of defending her mother. Because, like, Athena is portrayed as the bad guy in Medusa's life of, like, cursing her and her being like, it's not a curse, actually, but it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And Annabeth never actually, like, really argues.
Yeah, she says no, basically.
Which is, I think, supposed to read as her own insecurity of not really getting that motherly love and not really having a direct line to Athena, except I'm supposed to defend her.
Yeah,
I'm supposed to glorify her name.
I think a major theme of this episode is injecting some vulnerability into Annabeth, who up till now has been this like stoic warrior.
Yes.
I think so. To me, it like makes sense-ish. It comes back to like things being left vague, and it's like, if you want to fill in the blanks, you can. Because basically Medusa is like, you know, I did all this stuff for Athena, then Poseidon loved me, and it's embarrassed Athena, and she didn't do anything to Poseidon, she did it to me. And so it totally leaves out the like, we met at her temple and blah blah blah, and it's like, apparently that's too much for kids. And it still is valid to be like, oh, she didn't get mad at Poseidon for us meeting at the temple. But it isn't, it kind of leaves out the like, the two of you did do something. She didn't just like be like, oh, you're hanging out with a different god, I'm so upset. Like,
especially they frame it as Medusa would commit so much of her love to Athena and get nothing in return. Again, reflecting Annabeth, who, she has the Yankees cap, but she's never met her mom.
Yeah.
She's just hoping for her attention and doing all these things to please her, but is it really working?
Especially because Medusa's whole thing is, in this show, Athena's so self-righteous. And I'm like, that's not really why Athena curses you. Like, there's still a reason to critique Athena here, in that, like, she shouldn't be taking this out on the human whose fault it really isn't. But it's not that she's being self-righteous. It's that you're, like, defiling her temple. So, yeah, I just thought that was kind of weird. And then, but taking a step backward to the overall, like, huge change of they immediately know it's Medusa and all that stuff, and they, you know, talk with her much more about and the fact that she starts off by being like, oh, you're not your parents, I understand that, which is again completely opposite from the book.
Especially with Percy, of being like, don't be like your father, you don't have to be like them. You show me that you can be your own person.
Your own Persian.
And she turns on him when he won't turn on his friends, because Annabeth is a child of Athena who doesn't trust her. And that's enough for her to be like, well, I guess they all need to go. They'll all be statues now.
So here's the thing. On a very basic level, I kind of understand why they adapted things so heavily, right? The idea of them not immediately knowing it's Medusa in the books takes a leap of faith, because Medusa is such a famous, recognizable myth, and you know, especially Annabeth's supposed to be smart, so why wouldn't she have figured it out sooner?
That was a question that we had when we were discussing Lightning Thief.
To me, that is not so much of an issue that I wouldn't have gone with the original thing, which I find not only incredibly fun, but incredibly iconic, and a part of like what makes it a kid's property, like in a good way. The whole thing of like being taken in and like not knowing right away, and like the slow realization. And there are also things where like the food she gives them makes them sort of out of it, and Percy gets a little like hypnotized and stuff. And it's also, they don't immediately see like a bunch of monsters outside of the house.
It looks a lot more innocuous as a place.
It comes back to the thing of like, is this aimed at people who already know the myths or not? Because even though I was reading, you know, the first time I read this, I was a little bit older than the aimed at audience, and I knew Auntie M was going to be Medusa. I don't know that every kid reading that section would immediately figure that out.
Yeah.
And so that is sort of fun as a kid might like have a vague idea and slowly come to realization with the characters.
Yeah.
And I just find that section really, really fun in the book.
Yeah. Her motivation as well in the book is silly. She wants like the perfect statue of them smiling, like 3 kids smiling, and it'll sell so well. It'll be such an impressive statue because people are so afraid of her usually. It ruins the faces of her stone temples, of her stone adornments.
Yeah.
But where I actually felt the most like, why didn't you do this? Is use her own reflection against her.
Yeah.
To me, that is the iconic adaptation.
I think why they didn't do it.
And that's where I go, why are you afraid of making her seem like, what, silly enough to fall for it twice? Like be tricked in the same way as the myth of Perseus?
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to show a monster, a female character be fallible, because I do think the way they just like, yes, use strategy, but still kind of clumsily just trick her and chop her head off. I don't think that was like the best part anyway. What followed with Annabeth's Yankees hat and shipping her head, like that was the good part. That was the solid character work.
Well, this was again, between the bus scene and then the actual like fight with Medusa, really did feel like this is not an episode that has that much budget.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm a little torn. I think it was clever to switch it to being put the hat on her, which we've already established the hat. Then it does lead to that actual character interaction of like Percy being like, oh, well, we'll just keep the hat on her, and like not thinking about that it matters to Annabeth. I thought that was generally smart, and I think the idea is, I would guess that they did this change for the fans to be like, oh, we're going to keep them on their toes and like surprise them. That said, I think that the fight was so quick and like a corner of the room. Like I didn't believe they were in that room. It felt like they were in front of a green screen to me because there was so little movement, and it all happened so quickly. Grover flies in, they throw the hat, he cuts her head off. And whereas there is a lot more back and forth in the book, I like in the book that Grover is like swinging a tree branch at her, and he's using his sense of smell and hearing to be able to hit at her while he's flying around. It gives Grover like more to do.
Well, Grover has a lot of emotional stuff to do this episode, though. Him being stuck in the middle between Annabeth and Percy, and him trying to, singing the song to try and get them to get along, and then unfortunately, like them digging even deeper with him finding his Uncle Ferdinand and the Searcher's license, or the Searcher statue, all of that. I think that Grover's emotional journey in this episode is way better than what he gets.
I think there's a difference, though, in that, like, I like that in the book they show that he's like useful more. Like that there's a reason for him to be on this quest with them, that he isn't just like completely a sidekick who just talks. And I think by episode 5 we get that more.
Very much so.
But yeah, I just think that this is very quick. We're gonna be more positive about 4 and 5, guys. I guess this was not my episode.
It didn't work for me. I was really missing what the book gave us, but all in all, I appreciated on rewatch the arc that it gave Percy and Annabeth, especially how it continues to progress in 4 and 5. So I definitely feel like we have a solid beginning with like the activities that take place at camp, like getting to camp with 1 and 2. 3, 4, and 5 really give you a nice arc of like the trio. And I'm very curious if the end of 6, 7, and 8 will also have its own like mini arc. And in some ways I appreciate that. And maybe us being sick was kind of a blessing in disguise in this way, and getting to rewatch all 3 of these episodes in a row.
Well, I would say, just jump ahead a little bit, but the major arc left to a certain degree for Percy is going to be, in episode 5, he's like, I'm not the one. Like, I'm not that good at this. I'm just like here or whatever. Him like coming to terms with, you know what, I am actually a hero. I think that is a big part of what that's going to be, but also what being a hero means. I'll be interested to see whether they go the same route with him, like leaving his mom behind in the underworld and stuff like that. And whether he learns the lessons around Gabe and things too. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some changes there, but
yeah, we're ready for the changes now. They changed so much in episode 3 that I think we were waiting for for even more. So getting into episode 4, I plunged to my death.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that this was a episode where they were definitely more budget heavy, even though its runtime was fairly short.
Yeah.
And I appreciated the humor in it, as well as the emotional background of, hey, Grover and the environment and Grover having tension with Annabeth. Like it refocused their interactions in a new direction.
Also, when they splash the water on Percy, that's like the funniest thing.
Sitting in a fountain as he's just like not doing so hot was so good. Again, giving Annabeth more of that, like, she's trying, she's smart to think of this, but like, maybe you should stop.
Yeah, so it starts off with us getting Annabeth's backstory, and I think that this is a really well done scene.
Oh yeah,
I think
so
between the three of them, actually, they each have a different way of being good in this, and that Grover's just really ridiculous in a good way.
Yeah.
But I think that Annabeth and Percy's dialogue here is great. I think both actors do a really good job.
Yeah.
And they show, it was like a nuanced conversation, honestly, about, him talking about how he doesn't understand the gods and the sort of methodology of the camp and stuff like that. And her pointing out that it's not just the gods that are messed up. People are plenty messed up too.
Yeah, humans are fallible as well and fickle the way he didn't experience with his mom, but Annabeth was not so lucky.
Yeah.
So,
and I like how all the train stuff with the conductor, well, not conductor, but
the Amtrak police officer.
All that back and forth I thought was good. Let's talk about Echidna.
Yeah. I really liked her.
Yeah.
She is very much that like patronizing, maternal, middle-aged Karen figure.
Yeah. I pointed out that I hadn't really thought about it. It's because it's true in the book too, that we go 3 female villains in a row that are all sort of similar-ish, right? Where we have Mrs. Dodds, Medusa, and Echidna all sort of being like older, motherly-ish figures, right?
Yeah.
Which is just an interesting thing. And I wonder if that is supposed to say something about his relationship with his mom and like other kinds of moms or something. I don't know. Or if it's just random.
Or if it's supposed to be a big contrast to Sally.
Yeah.
The fact that Sally is so successful in her understanding her child, caring about him, and his well-being, and making all these sacrifices and choices for her kid versus like the other ways. Women are not all good. It's not just like one way of being. I think that they did enough of a difference of her again being like, I'm raising my monster child to be its best self. And if anything, I think it's more of a contrast to how Athena raises her children or doesn't. Like she has these high expectations from them. She's upset with Annabeth's like impertinence of sending Medusa's head,
which I thought that was really
Olympus.
good that they like made that a thing.
Yeah, it was Percy's choice. It was Percy being his snarky, like I won't take it from anyone attitude.
But that having consequences.
But it had consequences to Annabeth's life, even though she agreed to do it.
Yeah.
It's not fair, but it's the situation.
Yeah.
So whereas Echidna's like, oh, I'm okay with I'm showing the chimera how to hunt. I'm helping it learn to be its best self. And you demigods are actually the monsters towards my children. And I'm going to be against you. I appreciated that. I thought it was menacing in a different way because Medusa wasn't and Dodds wasn't either.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that Athena wasn't cast, because
Yeah.
given she like looms large over this season almost as much as Poseidon, in a way that I'm like, maybe they'll put her into season 2, because in the books we don't see her until season 3.
Yeah.
And Annabeth's not even there for that, really.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
until like the very end of the book.
It's interesting. They cast Hermes and
Yeah.
Hephaestus, who aren't in
Yeah.
Lightning, but they don't cast Athena, even though she's such a presence.
I just feel like she's a big deal. So maybe she'll get like a sign from her mom by the end or something. But yeah. So I don't know what else we want to mention.
Well, the fact that the St. Louis Arch is a temple to Athena, because it's perfection and math and dedicates like intelligence to her. Again, that's a nice touch. Again, we get Annabeth's like excitement for book learning, which is so
I did think it was a little strange that we got like 90% there, but they never had her actually say she loves architecture and wants to be an architect. I mean, because they showed her being smart and knowing a lot, but it comes off almost more like she knows about it because it's an Athena temple.
And not because it's her own passion.
Yeah, which I thought was an interesting thing.
We'll see. Maybe that's another subversion where show Annabeth actually has a passion for something else, which isn't like the worst change. Like,
she's a unicyclist at heart.
Yeah, because that requires so much book learning. Yeah. And again, Percy up in the arch, the way Percy tricks Annabeth.
Oh, I love that.
That was so good. Yep. Tricks them even because he's fading fast and does old 1-2 with Riptide and
I thought that the scene
her.
Against the Chimera is great.
It really was. Yeah.
Oh, you were saying the 1-2 with Annabeth. I thought you were saying 1-2 with the Chimera.
No, the 1-2 with Annabeth.
Okay,
Like, go, you got this. And I mean, like, no, I don't stand a chance right now. Anyway, he felt himself. It's that self-sacrificing Percy that we know and love.
Yeah. No, I thought that was really well done. I think the fight with the Chimera is good. Him falling into the water. Yeah. I like how they're slowly teasing out his powers a little bit more slowly than in the book.
Yeah.
I think he kind of a budget thing to a certain degree, but
yes,
but,
that too.
They're making it work.
Again, the water stuff, I don't think it really worked in parallel with like the opening scene with him and his mom in a pool.
Yeah.
I understand why they wanted to immerse him in another nightmare.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the parallel of him like struggling to swim as a kid and then struggling to trust his dad to save him, like I feel like it wasn't quite as good as it could have been. All right.
It was what it was.
Point is, we were left off on a cliffhanger of Percy under the water.
Yep.
What's going to happen? All right. In episode 5, a god buys us cheeseburgers.
Yeah, he does.
Ares was so funny.
Yeah.
Such a great comedic role.
Yeah.
And then there was the menace of it.
Yeah.
And it was a great balance as well.
I think this is my favorite like adaptation thing that they've done, right? Because he isn't really the character from the book.
No.
And I'm okay with that because I think this character's close enough and
he gets the point across.
Yeah, and it's still but brings something new. I think the humor is much more hyped up in this and it works really well. We get a lot more of him.
Yeah.
I think the actor I think this is my personal like one of my favorite performances in the show so far. Definitely my favorite adult so far. Just so many good lines. And I really enjoy his interactions with Grover as Grover flatters him and uses him a little
manipulates him for information.
I think that was a really smart way to give a sort of subplot as we have Annabeth and Percy go off and their little romantic journey.
And their little tunnel of love trip. Yeah, giving Grover so much intelligence and like of his own actions in the show is really working for me.
And I really enjoyed the like talking about like the lesser known wars and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
I bet Rick loves those wars. He's such a nerd. So coming back to the Percy and Annabeth dynamic, she's so worried. She refuses to believe he's dead. And then he guts out of the water and she gives him a big ol' hug.
Yeah, it's really cute.
but it doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be weird. Percy says it's not weird. Friends hug all the time. I mean, Grover didn't hug him, but like, it's
Grover
fine.
would have hugged him.
He should have hugged him, honestly, but I get why they didn't, because that's not the story they're telling right now.
Really good stuff with Annabeth and Percy in this episode. I think Tunnel of Love and all that stuff went well.
Yeah. It's especially good because, again, Annabeth has been, especially in episode 3, you know, Percy doesn't want to be a hero. He doesn't want to be a demigod. He's so resistant to the way gods do things, and it's getting into Annabeth's head.
Yeah.
She knows nothing else but this life of living.
Doesn't all have to be glory and
and
earning it and stuff like that.
And that's how she ends up saving him, is thanks to letting his perspective and doing things a little bit differently. She still is herself. She's doing it from her own stubborn point of view and is trying to use her intelligence of like working with the gears in the Tunnel of Love. But
I was glad she didn't just figure it out too. I was a little worried that was going to happen, that like, oh, she's so smart, she opens the trap or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, Athena couldn't do it, so I hope you don't do that.
But she tried. And the fact that she understood the mechanism of getting into the park and was the reason that they like could proceed safely and was impressed and happy. Again, like her engineering background was important.
Yeah.
And that, but it wasn't as important as the emotional stuff.
Yeah. She appealed to Hephaestus's better nature.
Yeah.
So we liked this episode as far as, I do think it was better as far as mythology stuff goes. We get Ares finally bringing up the whole Kronos thing incredibly quickly. Blink and you miss it. Not quite, but you know what I mean.
He brings up the solstice, the kids coming by. He doesn't like his own children. They're better than other children. Doesn't like his own kids.
We get, you know, some visions and animation stuff about what happens with Hephaestus and Hera, and then we get
Aphrodite.
and we get the main myth of the chair and all that stuff. So I did appreciate that. I still think it could have been better. We don't really get the like, oh, Hera hates her son because he's disfigured and ugly and disabled and all this stuff. And instead, we end up with the chair thing in a way that I feel like kind of it covers over the weirdness here, where it's like, oh, it leaves us with like Hephaestus. He's one of the good ones. And a big part of that story is basically him blackmailing Aphrodite into being his wife.
Yeah.
Who had rejected him previously.
And while it wasn't good of the gods to reject him, it wasn't good of Hera to hate her son for what he was or wasn't, and for Aphrodite to spurn him and all his intelligence and things he can do for Ares, who's more macho and manly or whatever. It just, it was, again, a very like palatably child-friendly but incomplete telling for a young viewer.
Yeah. So like where it worked really well for the character of Annabeth and also Percy sacrificing himself and all that too. I think that it worked so well that I'm okay that we didn't get the spiders, even though I like the Annabeth being afraid of spiders.
I'm okay with no spiders.
Yeah.
I'm with Annabeth on this one. We can wait for Arachne and that myth at another point.
That being said, I do think the myth is a little muddled, and I don't feel like I got anything out of Hephaestus actually being here. And I don't think that the way they wrote that character was anything special, especially in an episode where they did so well with Ares.
Yeah, I was really excited with the Timothy Amundsen casting for Hephaestus. Like, it really... It's a weird catch-22 of you don't want to center disability on Hephaestus and the actor's disability as well, but it's also like it is an important character thing. It is an important representation thing, but also the gods are jerks and bad guys sometimes in their own ego. It's just kind of a weird... I very much felt the Disney struggle of how do we make him do a good thing while not being a good guy.
Well,
and it just kind of suppressed the role in a disappointing way.
I just feel like literally anyone could have done that part.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer. I mean, I don't know the actor that well, but from all the positive things I've heard from people, it's a bummer, especially because if he wasn't going to have the performance thing, then to me it stands out even more that I'm like, this is not what I think Hephaestus looks like. Like I don't picture him that old. I picture him hulking. I picture him talking in a very gruff way, not an old person way.
He can be like he has a gruff voice that he can put on, and he was just very flat. Yeah. And I think in some ways I'm like, this was a direction choice. Yeah.
It's just not the Hephaestus from the books. And I know he's not. I know he's not in this.
And
book,
and that's the thing. There was no Hephaestus in this part of the book.
Yeah, I feel like they could have done it without him being there.
Yeah, but
especially with like him having like cameras and stuff, he could have like talked to the camera.
Yeah, I would have loved to see like the camera turn on and he's in his workshop and he's got a forge in the background and all of that.
Yeah,
that would have been really cool. But we'll see. Again, not a bad performance. Just like there's nothing to work with here.
It makes me a little bit worried for next episode where I'm like, do we need Hermes at the Lotus Hotel?
Yeah, the Lotus Hotel also not just being like a kid's playground. It's also adults gambling.
No. I think there's gambling in the. Yeah, I think it's both.
Well, in any case, I was sad to not see any kids in the preview.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know.
Ares was really good.
Yeah,
Ares
was
the
really
important one. Adam Coppola was.
I loved the moment of them popping their heads up.
Oh my God. Him finding them by the road. Yeah. Really good physical comedy there. Percy and him already not getting along so good.
Yep.
Really, Percy gets under his skin.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be important later.
My question for you is, what do you think Grover thinks he learned in this episode?
I think he thinks that one of Ares' kids stole it. I think
he thinks it's Clarice.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I could picture him coming to the conclusion of, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what else because he's not going to have actually figured it out. I highly doubt that. So
that would be a bit too much, in my opinion, anyway.
I hope he didn't actually figure it out, but I don't think he did. Yeah.
Yes. So we watched 3 episodes.
Yeah.
We didn't rank the first 2 because it was just very quick. Is now the time to fulfill the title of this podcast.
Let's be frank. It is time to rank.
This
one's good, but that one stank. Ranking Rick Riordan.
Dan is still sick, so we don't get your beautiful melody, but I liked your spoken word interpretation.
So I think the way to do this is I'm going to say episode 1 is where it is, and then we'll do episode 2. Is it above or below? Episode 3, is it where does it go?
Okay.
So episode 2 versus episode 1. What is your thought process?
I think 2 is better
than 1.
Yes.
I think when I first watched them, I felt the opposite, but I'm having trouble remembering why. Because
we didn't like Sally.
Well, no. I'm saying I think I liked 1 better than 2.
Gotcha.
But I think on reflection, I think 2 is better than 1.
I really liked what we did get of camp and the character dynamics of that very quick episode.
Yeah. So that brings up the episode 3 Medusa. Do you think that's better or worse than episode 1?
I did not enjoy episode 3, even though I got better on repeat and I saw more rationale behind the changes. I did not love it the way that I hoped to.
That was one of the scenes in the book that I was the most excited to see adapted, and having it basically adapted and not recreated was a real big bummer.
Yeah. It being a perspective that we have of excitement for this, it makes it a lower low, I think, than if we didn't have the book podcast beforehand.
Episode 4. That's a tough one. My question is it better than episode 2?
Why don't you answer that question first? Because I know what I think.
I think it's a tough one because so much happens in episode 2, and episode 4 is more of a action heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
I think episode 2 is probably slightly better, but I could go either direction.
I really liked episode 4
Yeah.
for how it gave us more emotional stuff for Grover, Annabeth, and Percy.
Mhm.
I think that them being the trio they are and their interpersonal actions and both physical in terms of like running, fighting, etc., did more for me than just like Percy at the camp. But I'm okay. To me, it's not like that dramatic a difference
I'm okay
in quality.
either way. I want to point out episode 2 does have the really good dramatic monologue to his mom, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
That said, I really like the opening of episode 4 with them on the train. I think that dramatic acting thing is really good. I do think that the action is actually better in episode 2 where he's fighting the other people. Than it goes on much more than the Chimera fight.
Yeah.
That said, the Chimera is really cool.
You've convinced me, though. You've reminded me of a lot about episode 2 and just how much I love that action sequence as well, and his monologue with his mom. So, I think it just edges it out.
Hard to beat camp.
Yeah.
All right, episode 5.
This episode.
I think it might be number 1.
It's my number 1.
Yeah.
It had so much going for it. I know we harped on the Hephaestus part, but I liked the Tunnel of Love. I liked the chair myth, and I really liked Ares and Grover as like a scene sequence.
I think every character that wasn't Hephaestus was at their peak in this episode. So, yeah.
Annabeth, and again, we get a little bit of the romantic beginnings.
And even just them, I just feel like we got the most of them like having chemistry as characters.
As friends.
Yeah. So, and I think Grover got great stuff. I think Ares was awesome, and it's good that we got more of him considering where we see he goes.
Mm-hmm.
I really like it. So,
I think that's both of our number 1.
All right, so we're saying worst to best. Episode 3, Medusa.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 1, Sally.
That's not fair.
Episode 4, Chimera. Episode 2, Camp. And episode 5 is number
1. Our favorite so far.
Is Hephaestus and Tunnel of Love. And
yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we ranked.
We did. We did, in fact, rank. Let us know your rankings in the comments below the YouTube video. Send us feedback at our podcast feedback on gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can also review us or rate us on iTunes or Spotify. I think you can even send questions via Spotify now, which I haven't really figured that out, but I think it's a thing.
If you have questions, YouTube and email are the best ways to find us.
Yeah, and I will include feedback in the next one, just because we have 3 episodes to hit on here. So any last things?
I am really overall enjoying the pace of the season. I'm on its wavelength. I'm overall excited for Lotus Hotel, cautiously optimistic for what it'll bring. But let's get to that underworld and find that lightning thief. Like, the clock is ticking, the solstices are coming, and
the solstices
is a coming. I didn't really have a line to back that up.
Well, I apologize if I was overly negative in this one, because I really loved 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And just because I have critiques or whatever doesn't stop the fact that I really did enjoy 4 and 5.
We had a lot of positive things to say. We just also had some not so positive,
which is why you come to us. So
we'll give you a balance. That's for sure.
Thank you so much for listening. Let us know your thoughts, and may the gods be ever in your favor.
Bye-bye.